So my name is Donna DuPont. I am a foresight and design strategist. I do a fair bit of work in the space of disaster, risk management, risk reduction, climate change, sustainability, as well as I work a fair bit with the Canadian Forces College around applying design in real world military contexts for complex problem solving. It's an interesting question. So, within the network of islands, I see my island as really forward looking. That's kind of looking just over the horizon to what's changing in the broader system and how that could affect all the other islands. And that could look like potential disruption. It could look like new opportunities. And I think visiting my island, it provides the other islands, an opportunity to explore different perspectives, different scenarios, different futures, to have different kinds of conversations about what could be possible, how that might challenge our thinking about the future, and new ideas for innovation, for design moving forward. Design is one of those terms. It's a really generic term, and it's quite broad, and it means different things to different people depending on how they've approached design, how they've used it, how they apply it. So for me, when I think of design, I always think of design in terms of the context of a current situation, whether it's a problem or a challenge, and you're looking for a different perspective. You know, it could be a human-centered perspective, depending on what the problem is, to get deeper insights into what the problem is, go beneath the surface to really understand it. Or it could be looking at it from a system point of view and looking at all of the relationships in the system and how things are changing and understanding patterns, understanding behavior. And really, a lot of different methods that are selected in design are really about getting perspectives, getting a deeper understanding of the situation or a context in order to propose different solutions moving forward, different ideas, new ideas that perhaps you wouldn't have thought about by looking at it just at the surface. So design really allows you to go a little bit deeper. It allows you to challenge your thinking, and it allows you to, it stimulates new ideas, and that can really be innovative. It can be transformative depending on, the environment you're working in. So that's what design means to me. And I use it a lot in the context of human-centered issues where there's people involved. But I love using it also in a strategic context as well, where you're looking at how do you apply a strategic lens strategy in a very complex, changing environment. And so that's where I think there's so much benefit and there's so much value, especially in today's world where there's a lot of uncertainty. I use 3 words to describe my approach. It's navigate, anticipate, innovate. So navigating is all about navigating complexity and uncertainty, which there's a lot of it today. And so how do you do that in a constructive way where you can generate insights and understanding? Anticipate is that forward-looking lens to the future. So it's not about just what we know today, or in the short term, but it's also how are things changing moving into the future? What could that look like? And how can we anticipate in different ways to really challenge our thinking about the future and what's possible? And of course, generating those 2 different levels of insight from navigate and anticipate, it really gives you new ideas about innovating, new ways perhaps that we can move into the future. So that's kind of my pitch, is that it's all about navigating the situation, the current context, anticipating, the forward-looking lens and putting all of that information together to really put new ideas into the world. Everyone has their own pathway towards design. Mine came from a very strong planning, policy, and design background, but design in terms of program planning and design. And so I was doing that for a fair bit for many years for the government. And it was always about change. It was always about how can we improve something? How can we put a new program out there to make a difference or solve a problem? So it was always focusing on a challenge, but also looking to improve the future. And so that was my starting point for design. And I had very limited tools. So as I started to come across more complex situations, I was really searching for new tools, new ways of doing what I did, but better, right? And so that really led me to study design. So I'm one of those practitioners that went full on and did a master's degree in strategic foresight innovation, which is a master's in design. And it allowed me to really explore different types of design methodologies and apply them in different ways. And I'm always challenging myself in terms of the types of methods, the types of approaches, and how to combine them in different ways, and the value of each one in terms of what is it tapped into, what type of dialogue does it stimulate, what new ideas and insights does it generate. That's my approach. And so I take a very practical approach to design where I'm really focused on who is my audience that I'm working with, who are those that want to learn design, and what is the space they're working in, and what are the tools that will give them the deepest insights to understand the context, what's changing, and then really stimulate dialogue. So I'm a very practical approach, but very, very targeted. And so it can change based on the audience and really what the output is that they're looking for in terms of what they want to create with those insights. So that makes me a little bit unique in terms of my approach to design, because it's been a really gradual building over many years, almost 15 years of working in policy planning and then program design, and then moving into fully foresight, systems design, and human-centered design. Well, on a personal level, I think my life is a really great example of design, and I think that applies to everybody. I mean, design is a lot of reflecting, right? It's reflecting on what you're learning, and it's a lot about understanding and making new choices. And part of that means letting go of things that might not work anymore because the environment has changed, and opening up to new opportunities and new perspectives moving in the future. So on a practical level, on a personal level, I would say that just the idea of starting my own consultancy and starting to really open myself up to those possibilities of what does that look like? How do I function independently? Who are my networks? What do I need to let go of? What are my areas of focus? And that's constantly shifting. And it's constantly fine-tuning based on opportunities, what's changing. And so that's a real practical, personal approach to applying design that I've used in my own life and business, that I'm sure many people use that they don't even realize that they're doing it. At a global level, I've done a fair bit of work, collaborating with different organizations that are applying design in different contexts, whether it's disaster risk management, reduction, futures in different ways of how to engage people and be more inclusive and participatory, as well as my research. My research has it's really been has had a global focus, really tapping into some of the big platform commitments at the global level with frameworks like Sendai, the Paris Agreement, and the SDGs, and really getting practitioners' point of view and being able to get that perspective and be able to code that data in a way and apply it to design frameworks to understand a current paradigm, a current way of working, understanding the world, but also identifying where the challenges are in the system and the new opportunities going forward. So in a global perspective, that's been really an interesting piece of work for me, and that's constantly growing because there's other projects I'm involved with that deal with climate change, and how do we get to net zero 2030 with greenhouse gas emissions? How do we create a more sustainable future? How do we mitigate? How do we, anticipate in different ways using technology and artificial intelligence? So there's so many different projects I'm involved with on a global level, and those are really exciting opportunities to apply design in very different ways and collaborating with different people with different expertise to create something completely new. I've always been excited by the statement that we can shape the future. We always think about the future as something that happens to us that's outside of our control and that we have to predict it. But in futures and foresight, it's a very different perspective. It's more about what is our understanding of the past? How do we understand the past and the current, state of things, and how do we want to shape things moving into the future? What new choices do we want to make? Where do we want to invest our energy? Where do we see change? And so it's this very proactive element. And so it really is empowering. So I love that perspective when it comes to the future. And I'm always excited about where change is possible and finding those opportunities within the system. In terms of projects, there's so many projects that I really I'm involved with a variety of different collaborative partners. The ones that excite me the most are the ones that really are inclusive in different ways, where they allow an opportunity to work with different stakeholder groups, bringing them together and really understanding different perspectives as part of a broader system. And so when you work on projects like that are truly collaborative and diverse, there's so much learning and understanding that happens between groups, and it also unleashes really new ideas that usually you don't see when you just work with one isolated group of professionals who have a very probably similar worldview and a very specific way of seeing the world and seeing their role in it. So I'm always excited about those projects that are super inclusive. And for me, a lot of my focus has been around risk reduction, sustainability, and governance. A lot in governance, talking about what is the future of governance, whether it's disaster management or environmental social governance. What does that look like going to the future? And so for me, that's linked very much to the climate change agenda and all of the challenges related to just what's the climate shifts that we're seeing and what that means, whether it's, local level in terms of disasters, fires, flooding, heat waves, Or is it leading to areas of drought where you have food and water security issues, and those lead to potential conflict issues and migration issues. These are the types of projects that really excite me in terms of understanding the system, but understanding opportunities to proactively intervene and really create a more sustainable future. So for me, having studied in a design school, design thinking, just the term design thinking, is very narrow in the civilian world when you talk about a design, because it's usually like a 5-step process of it's like a methodology or a method that people apply, right? But for me, I've come to learn that really when I speak to others, design thinking is really about, it can be broader than just, a 5-step design process. It really can be about how are you challenging your thinking about the current context and the way you understand the world. And so whether that's on an individual problem level or if it's a systems level. And so design thinking is really about the cognitive side of how do you understand the problem? How do you see it? What are your biases? Where are your blind spots? And how are you challenging your thinking about the world? So it's very helpful, but the thinking part needs to be married to the action part. So you can have all of the greatest ideas that come out of a session in a workshop, but then it's about taking those ideas and figuring out what you want to put into action, and then designing solutions to put out in the world. And so the thinking needs to be married with action. And so I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions, that people think, okay, you just do design thinking and it's great. You're going to shift perspectives. You're going to shift perceptions. You're going to uncover these things. But there needs to be intentional action towards moving those ideas into steps, into solutions that are actionable in the world. Otherwise, the value of those insights they're not materialized. And so that becomes the greatest loss without the application. One of the most challenging things I've had to overcome in the last few years it was a very personal situation for me, and it related to my health. So I had a health crisis back in 2016 that was quite, it was very slow progressing. And, for me, it materialized very slowly to the point where I was pushing through. And then I just, it was one of those moments where I just couldn't push through anymore. And it was a really hard moment for me, because it was one of those situations where I knew I had to make a very big decision about what I wanted moving forward, and how I wanted to have a more balanced life, and what type of work I wanted to do moving into the future. And so to me, it was a journey about making that decision, choosing to let go of certain things, and completely embracing the unknown and uncertainty, and moving into that, not with a full plan, but with the openness of experiencing and finding out what journey is in store for me if I go down this path. And as I look back on that, and I'm sure many people have been through a similar situation in their life where something happens outside of their control and they're forced to make a decision and it changes the trajectory of their life. This is a design methodology or a design model that's called the hero's journey. And it's all about shifting from our known world to the unknown, and going on a different adventure and trying new things and learning and making mistakes, but learning from those mistakes and pivoting and developing new skills. And then you come back completely changed and transformed. So I think for me, that's been one of the most challenging things is going through that health crisis. But that health crisis was a huge opening for me to challenge myself and to start a new journey that I'm on today that is exciting. And I would have never had the courage to do it had that adversity not happened in my life. So there's always a plus sometimes to adversity. Sometimes we don't see it right away. Sometimes we don't understand. Sometimes it's forcing us to make different decisions and change, which is scary, very scary. But sometimes looking back, you can see how those can potentially be a blessing and push us into a direction that's very much needed. I had a lot of accomplishments along my career path, and they've been really nice incremental steps that I've just built on over time and continue to grow. I think for me, the biggest accomplishment has been to really develop my own business and then to also have strong networks. And I think the networks is where I've really I'm most proud of, because it's been an incredible opportunity to collaborate with people who are like-minded, not just within Canada, but globally. And so I'm really proud about cultivating all of those relationships, which don't happen overnight. It's a lot of getting to know people, understanding people, finding out common values, common interests, and finding ways to work together. And so it's something that is a process that takes time. And I'm really proud of that, because it's through those networks that I've been invited to be part of and to make contributions in different projects that, without I wouldn't have had that opportunity. So that's what I'm most proud of. And for me, I see those networks getting stronger and stronger over time, and opening up more possibility. So I'm really proud of that. And I'm also proud of the ability to pivot and change, and to not get so rigid to a certain way of doing things, but realizing, okay, something is changing or there's new opportunity. Maybe I need to adapt, and that's okay. And I think that's a very healthy thing, not just professionally, but also in our personal lives. A lot. So prior to the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, I've done work in pandemic planning, as working in emergency management for the province of Ontario. So I've intersected with plans. I've had some experience in infectious disease type of situations, right? And what this has taught me. Also, just to add, I did my research in emergency management futures research during the pandemic. So there was a lot of insights generated through my research as well. But what this pandemic has revealed to me a lot is that the importance of understanding and working with uncertainty. A lot of times we work with what we know. We're very comfortable with variables that we know. We want to predict things, and then we plan based on predictions and forecasting. But the world is more complex than that. There are a lot of variables. There's a lot of changes constantly happening. And so it's important to understand systems, complex systems, but it's also important to understand where those conflicts and contradictions are happening in a system that could potentially be very disruptive. And this is what we're seeing with the pandemic, is that this is a level of uncertainty that we're aware of. Pandemic or infectious disease threats. It's not a black swan type of an event, but it is something that if we don't pay attention to, and if we don't understand the complexity of a system and all of the potential implications, if it were to, become disruptive, or or if something were to extend beyond something we can contain. Um, it's important to understand that. It's important to identify early. It's important to mitigate where you can. But these types of situations are paradigm shifting, because as you can see, right, like this is not just contained to healthcare. I mean, it's affected the way we, interact in communities with a lot of the, isolation and home quarantining. Travel's been affected. Businesses have been affected. So this type of system type of impact was discussed, right? But no one ever believed it would ever happen. And so this is a really good example that, yes, certain things, they could start off very small. They look like they're under control, but then it can escalate and it can be quite disruptive. And so we need to understand that. We need to understand systems. We need to understand those types of emerging events that have the potential to really be tremendously disruptive, and how that looks across a system. What are the consequences across? So for me, it's really strengthened my commitment to design, not just from a systems point of view to navigating system, but also the anticipatory lens. And then, of course, if you can understand a system and you can anticipate change, then you have a potential for adaptive capacity and to be able to make decisions and be able to anticipate, and hopefully that might mitigate or minimize the disruption.